Good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Abhinav Agarwal, and I am the curator of the Indic Book Club. And welcome to this latest edition on the Indic Book Club. We have been running this weekly series since November of 2020, which means we've been doing this for close to 6 months now. And the intent is to help Indic writers and IBC writers improve their craft and art of writing. And we do this by having you, asking you, requesting you to submit short pieces up to 800 words in length and send them to Otis in a particular format. And what Otis does is he puts his trained academic professional's hat on. And he evaluates those pieces. He sends the feedback in. He marks up your PDF. That was a wonderful act. And he sends that feedback to you. And then in this Sunday session, he'll take those pieces. He'll walk us through them. Elaborate on some of the feedback he has given, as well as take this opportunity to give a bigger picture also in terms of some of the things we should think of when we're writing from the point of view, the narrative, and other good things. Now, before I hand it over to Otis, just one other word, which is that last week, for those of you who attended, G.V. Shivkumar, who is the curator of the next anthology being planned, which is on the lesser known characters of the Mahabharata, and he has identified, shortlisted 10 authors whose works will be included in that collection. And the intent is to use these sessions to have those writers send in some writing pieces. And there's a terrible echo. I'm not sure who it's coming from. I would request everyone else to please go on mute if you are not already. Aha, and we have a culprit. So, and from what Otis tells me that he has got a lot of pieces, so that's good. We probably most certainly won't have time to go through all the pieces today. However, Otis said that what he will do is he'll go through some of the pieces, but before he does that, he'll sort of give a big picture in terms of general writing guidance that would help and would probably be applicable, given that all the 10 stories are going to follow a certain theme and pattern. So with that, I will turn this over to you with the last piece of info that these sessions are recorded and we make them available after a couple of days on YouTube. So you can follow us on Twitter at Indic Book Club, and you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Indic Book Club. And over to you, Otis.
Abhinav, just one clarification. So there are two anthologies. The Lesser Known Characters is the one I'm working on, and then Shiva Kumar is working on the Indic Women one.
Oh, my bad. Yes, sorry. Yeah. So yes, two anthologies. Two is better than one. Aditi on the Lesser Known Characters, and Shiv Kumar on Indic Women of substance. Yes, my bad. So we have not one but two anthologies, 20 stories, and possibly 20 authors there. Or 25 authors. So I'll go quiet now and over to you, Otis.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, this is great. Okay, what do they call it? An embarrassment of riches. So this week with the anthologies, apparently those, working on the anthologies put the word out to send, a short extra at the beginning. Advantageous, and they sure did start coming in. I have my schedule, of course, already. So I was trying to keep up with my general schedule, which is a little hectic, and so I did not get to all the. But I began reading into them, and myself at a certain point, because I saw as I say, the writing on the wall that I wasn't able to complete all the pieces. I thought about, what might I say that might be applicable to a lot of the pieces to kind of throw that back at everyone, maybe to get them to maybe rethink a little bit themselves about what their approach is and what the purpose of this work is. So I don't have an exact method, and all you write, know that you grill over and you do things in whatever order, and then finally what we do when we write and when we revise is we sequence our events. So I'm not sure that I went into this exactly perfectly, or wrote into basically trying to answer the question, what is a story, right? Because that's the thing that we're trying to produce. So what is it? What is it that we're trying to produce? What is it that we're trying to get on the page? It's a story is a dynamic action that involves the reader in the dynamic action that takes them from A and dynamic action to point B. Essentially, what a story is a character intersects with an event, is the antagonist force, and it achieves an outcome. But we'll go into that a little quickly in a minute. Then I thought, so there's two anthologies. The story conversation, I realize, is sort of writing into it and writing some notes that I will bring up onto our screen in a second, applies to all of us. We're always writing stories. It doesn't matter whether we're writing you. It doesn't matter if we're writing about, lesser known characters of the Mahata. It doesn't matter if we're writing a non-piece. It doesn't matter. It's always be a story. It's always be this basically what we sometimes call a conflict, regardless of what we think about that term, of a character or something, an entity of some kind, coming to bear on something else, right? An idea, another character, natural disaster, and then it's a result of some kind. Basically, it's sort of ridiculously simple. 1 + 2 = 3. That's basically what a story is. It's a very simple structure. But I thought, because there are so many works that are involved with these two anthologies, lesser known characters and women of the Mahabharata. I think I got that right, if I didn't. That I might talking about what is I class those categories as minor characters. Okay, so there's major characters, there's minor characters. And so I'll go about explaining that. But the first thing I wanted to sort of try to address was, why do we write about minor characters? So let me share my screen. Okay, you see my screen? It's a PDF that I've made with my Notability thing. We sometimes have problems sharing my Notability, so and then I just made a PDF and I put it up there. Okay, you can see my screen? So
Yes.
What is the purpose of writing about minor characters? This is actually, for me, it's like such a profound question. So the way I begin talking about it is that in stories, generally, one or more characters are in the conflict. So however you want to think about it. If you're thinking about the Mahabharata, there's some centralized characters, Arjun, I think. In later on, I'll talk about the Great Gatsby. There's Nick as the POV character, or Gatsby. There's certain people who are framed, and we'll talk about that. They are the protagonists, and what that means is that they are the actors, basically. They do stuff in the story. And they basically face forces of antagonism, that obligate them to engage in yet more actions, depending on how the story goes. So they're framed, they're central. As being central, as I say, so in stories, one or more characters are framed. Let's see if I can do something here. Do this. Okay, one or more characters are framed. Sorry, this is, oh my gosh, I don't know what my thing is doing. Okay, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm stopping doing that. Okay. In stories, more characters are framed in the conflict. As actors, their humanity is centralized. So there are complex characters that have, they are treated as complex, having both an external struggle, okay? This is something that we can note for ourselves, okay? So the protagonist has an external struggle, is that they want something. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be they want money. They want a job. They want a girlfriend, boyfriend. They want something. So that's their external conflict, and they're trying to get it. And they have an internal struggle, an internal conflict, which is a subconscious need. This makes them complex. Minor characters, generally, because they're not framed, their motivation is not really dealt with in the story. They just come in, they're just minor characters. They come in and say, the main character's running down the street and he goes, "Where to the bank?" And the minor character goes, that way. Okay, we don't know the minor character's motivation. We don't know why they pointed that direction and not that direction. We don't know what motivates them to help this person. We don't know what motivates to maybe turn them in the wrong direction. We don't know any of those minor characters. Their life and motivation off the page. They just come in, they serve their role, they disappear basically. Maybe they come in again at the end. "Hey, aren't you that guy I asked where the bank was?" It's like, "Yep." "You lied to me. Why'd you lie?" It's like, "I don't know. I didn't know where the bank was." Right? Minor character's gone. Okay, so minor character came in and then came. Done. So this is the issue with minor characters. And so I'll tell you, I have a long, long intellectual writing struggle with this idea of minor characters. Okay, I think every writer probably does. As I was becoming a writer, I seem to come to the conclusion that I was a minor character. That's what I thought. I was like, wait a second, I'm a minor character. I'm a minor character in other people's lives. And I even wrote a story called Minor Character. And it was me being a minor character in everyone else's life. They seemed the hero, and I seemed like the person that said, "That's the way to the bank." And then but the other place where this really hit me strongly was reading the novels of Jane Austen. Okay, so minor characters are treated inhumanely, basically, by storytellers. This is the point. It's not done maliciously necessarily. I'm not saying that. It's just that the writer, the universal consciousness, if you will, what it is that makes a story happen, is just not really considering everybody. And my greatest example for this is Jane Austen novels. Okay, I read the Jane Austens. I love them. I even like the movies as I see them. Centralized those novels are, for example, Emma or some of the other characters. I was going to say Holly Golightly, but she's in Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. Anyway, centralized is a character here, but in the Jane Austen novels, these people, they eat, they often are eating, but nobody's cooking, right? No one else is in the room. They're drinking and they're having more things. They're doing all these things and enjoying this kind of lavish lifestyle, even though they're vying for money all the time, and there's people with estates and they're doing all those things. But if you read it, okay, if you see the movie, you'll see other people, right? But if you read the book, those servants, the servant class, a whole class of human beings don't exist. Does that make sense? They're minor characters. So minor, in fact, that they don't even exist. A little bit later in this, I'll bring up another place where I think of this that might be kind of applicable to the Mahabharata. So in the Judeo-Christian tradition, of course, we have Abraham and Isaac. I think about this a lot. We get that story from Abraham's point of view, basically. Oh, he's tried to do this thing, take his kid up the mountain and then, you know, sacrifice him. Okay. I mean, that's difficult, right? But it's not as difficult as for Isaac. Isaac is the character in that story, right? We don't get Isaac's point of view about father grabbing him one day, tying him up and starting to haul him up the mountain. Get that story. There's a story we don't get. I feel like I want to do it like I'm giving a lecture here. Anyone? Okay, we don't get Sarah's point of view. Sarah is the mother of Isaac in this case. Yeah, go ahead. Abhinav.
So one, as you were saying this, a couple of questions struck me. So, minor characters, yes, I can imagine that, if there is a novel or story with no minor characters, it might feel a little sparse, or in some cases, I can imagine a minor character serves to advance the story or to, for reasons of plot. But is there more to minor characters that we should be aware of?
Well, I just right now I just want to develop essentially what a minor character is, because what we have if we're going to be writing minor characters is we have the problem basically of taking a minor character who is not dealt with complete humanity, right? They're just serve a function basically within the story. And actually, if we're going to write a story about them, we must elevate to complete humanity. This is our problem, okay? And actually, you're kind of pointing me to the central issue. It's really a question of what you want to do. So if you're writing an anthology, I mean, I'm not, believe me, I'm not imagining this is necessarily an easy thing to talk about. We can't stories about minor characters without elevating them up to humanity, because it will not be a story. This is our problem. So if we take minor characters and we simply write about them in their same subordinate position as they were already depicted in the story, right? We're not writing a story. That's the problem, because a story humanizes the central character, the main character. So we're taking a minor character and elevating them up to the main character, and therefore we must humanize them in order to write a story. It's so funny. I was thinking about this. It's like, I'm not doing this. It's not me. I don't want to rain on anyone's parade about what they can do in a story. It seems to me that this is just universally true. This is what a story does. Story centralizes a protagonistic force, and it makes us empathetic to their human struggle. That presupposes that it must be a human struggle, and then they're not a minor character. Going back to my evolution as a writer, yes, I wrote a story called Minor Character. And I wrote it was kind of a long piece in which everyone else's point of view was there, but my central point of view was never there. And I would come in, I don't know, it was bizarre, experimental, whatever. But what you come to realize, and this was part of my evolution, is that all major characters in our own story. There is no other choice to it. We're the character in our story. We're the actor in our own story. And so if we write about the minors, we have to make that happen. We have to make the major character with full humanity. So I want to say, I mentioned the Jane Austen novels, but you probably recognize yourself from in India, right? Colonial literature written, but there would be an absence of Indian characters, perhaps, right? The Indian characters are minor. They're not centralized in the colonial literature. Great Gatsby is a little bit more complex in a sense because Nick is the POV character. He's the one who sees Gatsby. In that one, Gatsby is made as kind of a central figure, but he really isn't a central figure. The point of view character Nick is the central figure because Nick is the one who has an experience and changes. Okay, so mark that. That's an important point. The central protagonist, they are the protagonist because they, remember I said, a story is character meets event, achieves outcome / resolution of some kind, and that is a change in character. So what we find, right, if we're trying to take a minor character out of a story and basically write them as a central character, is that they weren't treated as human beings in the first story. So we don't know who they are. We don't know why they did something. They did something, right? That's the way to the bank. They did something. But we also don't know the outcome of the event for them because they're not on the page. They're immaterial in a sense. So we want to, first, we have to know this character in a deep, complex way. We have to illustrate the event that takes place. And then we also have to deal with the outcome. And both of those things, the understanding of the character, right? The event we might know, right? It's in the Mahabharata, for example, right? This thing happened. The press said yes to the marriage proposal, right? Okay, so we have that event. So we know that, but we don't know this person. And then we have the event, and then we don't know the outcome. Right? And those are the things that we have to deal with, and we have to mention those basically. And this is where it gets tricky, right? If you find that you're in a situation in which you don't feel like you can imagine the greater complexity of the character and imagine the potential outcomes for the human being of the minor character, you have a problem. That's a conflict for me that's created by it's not created by me, it's created by the demand of story, what story does. And so I just offer it to you for now. Okay, so I wanted to give you, if you're thinking about constructing these stories about minor characters, I want to give you a couple of great examples. Okay, to me, the greatest example of this is Tom Stopper's play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Ridiculously amazing play. I just noticed, because I had to look up how to spell Guildenstern, that it is available on YouTube with Tim Roth, seemingly completely. I don't know, maybe you have to rent it. But anyway, if you have not seen it, it's amazing. Another great example that's been hugely influential in my life, and going back, so Mahabharata is an ancient, story, perhaps out of an oral tradition, an epic, it's an epic. This is an example, John Gardner, right here. Sorry, I don't have anything on now. Gardner, he was a professor at the university that I went to, SUNY Binghamton, and I stupidly, because I was an undergraduate and too much beer, did not even take a class with him. I mean, what an idiot I am. So anyway, John Gardner wrote Grendel, which is a retelling of, oh no, please don't.
Beowulf.
Hogarth. Well, thank you, Beowulf. It's a retelling of Beowulf from Grendel's point of view. So in Beowulf, Grendel is a minor character. Well, Grendel is the antagonist, so a major character in that, but we don't know Grendel's point of view. John reversed that and writes Grendel's point of view. That's making Grendel that's making Grendel the protagonist. And now Beowulf, Hogarth, I forget. Now the human beings are the antagonistic force against Grendel. A very, very illustrative example. I can draw upon the Iliad, of course, I know very well. It'd be like to write about minor characters, it would be like writing in the Iliad from Helen's point of view, right? So in Helen's point of view, right now in the Iliad is simply stolen by Paris. But if I were writing Helen's point of view, I'd probably start with her being pretty not happy with, is it Menelaus or whoever? Menelaus or the other king? No, not Agamemnon. Anyway, so Aditi's laughing at my incomplete knowledge of epics. But I'd be writing about Helen, okay? So, or I'd be writing about Hector, who's always been my favorite character in the Iliad. He's the guy that comes out and basically fights Achilles, who he has no chance of defeating. I mean, talk about a story that I care about much more than the story of Achilles. Or writing about Paris. What about that guy? I mean, I think I know the type. Anyway, the way that these stories are done, and this is particularly evident in the Stoppard play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, is that it basically takes a story that you understand and it looks for where these minor characters intersect with that, right? So that's part of the larger cultural. But what the writer needs to do then is write the other parts, those actions understandable and part of their story. So here I write protagonist and minor characters intersection with the protagonist. So here, that little thing, the little X's there show the points of intersection that you can consider. So in Hamlet, we have the Hamlet story, which is not dealt with at all in the Stoppard play. We actually, during the period where Hamlet's off stage, it's brilliant. I saw it, unbelievable. You know, we know what happens in Hamlet. So that's happening off stage. And we have Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are just sitting there talking. They're like, what are we doing? Where are we? And then they're like, suddenly they come in, they say something and brilliant. So anyway, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, them doing nothing, and then they intersect and they do their small part, they do their small part, they do their small part. Stoppard then writes the entire story. I don't know if you can see my cursor. So we're following them, right? Like I'm saying, they're sitting there, then they do their part, then we follow them again, they do their part, follow them, follow them. That's the story we're writing. Oh, that's separated this. So if I was writing about Helen, I might write Helen's story. And then I get to, you know, Paris says, come on, what do you have to lose? Let's run. We can run now. We love each other. And she says, okay, that's her action in the story, right? Now I follow her. She's gone back to Troy. Maybe it's not as great with Paris as she thought it was going to be. But then, oh, guess what? There's a whole bunch of troops there. They're blaming it on you, on me. They're not blaming, it's not me, it's because of the trade routes, she might say. Okay, and then we follow and we go someplace else. And here I'm ending with this idea of Abraham, right? So in that story, we get Abraham's point of view, but we're not understanding Isaac. We don't have him playing with his toys, whatever he has, these toys. Suddenly, oh, hi, Dad, what's happening? Why are you grabbing me? Where are you taking me? Ah, you know, and then up the mountain he goes. We don't have Sarah's story. Sarah, you know, what's that, Abraham? What are you doing? What on earth are you doing? And he's like, be quiet. You don't get to say what happens. So that's a little bit of my conversation about what it is to write about minor characters. But I go back to, so in a couple of the pieces that I've read so far, it seems like, and I want to recognize that I appreciate that there can be a conflict and a difficulty with taking the step to really route the minor, making them, making the minor character who is a human being and not treating them as minor anymore, but treating them as central. I think that that is the issue. And that's what's required in order to write a story that is going to be compelling about that character. If you take that character and you're simply just bracketing them and basically giving them in their same subordinate position, right? So, you know, a person who is essentially not motivated, who does not engage in complex internal and internal struggle, if you don't treat those issues, then you're just really bracketing. You're just getting them as minor characters, and that, you know, that's maybe more like if you had a dictionary of, you know, the characters of the Mahabharata, then you could have all of them, and, you know, you could say exactly how they're represented in the book, and that would be kind of a literal representation of who they were in that book. But the other side is, if we want to take them as writer and write the story about, then we have some other options. So I'm going to stop that shit now. I'm happy to share those notes and draw up something more formal on. So let me think. And any questions about that, or, you know, trepidations, DT, Ashvan? I'm a little feed. I don't want to feel like I'm.
I think it's really helpful because I think one of the concerns is because the Mahabharata is a sacred text, so there's always a fear of meddling with it. But I think the point that you make is a crucial one, which is it can't just be even looking at the events of the Mahabharata through this character's point of view, because if it's just about those events, there's still that minor role, but it's really making the story about the minor character and not about the Mahabharata through the prism of that minor character. So I think that's crucial.
Right. You know, right, to the point of, like, in our own lives, none of us are minor characters. Okay, so like Helen, for example, when she doesn't think of herself as her when she decides to flee with Paris, right? It's not a minor character in her life doing that action, and none of us are, whatever those actions might be. And that's basically what I'm trying to frame in the story, is that protagonist is the antagonistic response. But it's still, because it falls into this, you know, kind of difficult area. If I were writing the story of you know, of Sarah in the Abraham and Isaac story, you know, there are some people who would say, what do you mean? There is no story of Sarah, right? But I say, I think there, you know, and that's what I would have to do. It's actually, I do understand, not an easy thing to do in more ways than one. I mean, you could just look at it in terms of that issue, right? But it's also difficult for us as writers to do that, you know, to get to this where we can sort of release ourselves from some of the, I want to say, like, the authority of our understanding, and go to another place of imagination, which is, I think, a deeper authority. I don't know. I don't know how to say it, but I think we have to trust ourselves a little bit. And then our responsibility is always to do the work as well as we can. We can't do it better than we can, so we don't have to worry about that. So we shouldn't worry about that. But if we do take on the task, let it as well as we can. When we attempt to capture a character and write a story about them, we just want to very, very best, really try and capture their humanity. Doing less than that, this is where I really fall sort of aesthetically. We should never do less than that. We always have to do our very best to truly capture the humanity character we decide to frame. Because if we do that, then we're just using them, and we should not ever use. Maybe I will share this time. I guess I should admit that I'm a little bit worried, because this is obviously a lot of weight. I understand, and I'm a little bit hesitant maybe to look at people's pieces individually right this moment, because I don't want weight to fall on anyone, specifically. So maybe if you indulge me, I would talk a little bit about what a story, and that's something that not only for these anthologies, but just for everyone, including Ram and his reviews, to bring into the picture, because they're so helpful to me. Maybe I can talk about that for a little. Let me.
Otis, one other question or observation. So, you said that a story has to humanize the characters, right? And minor characters present somewhat of a dilemma or a challenge on that account, because the book on which these minor characters are based may not have enough material for someone to, quote unquote, humanize these characters. Are there successful examples of how, taking from these epics, these Greek epics or otherwise, minor characters have been given their due importance, or they have been elevated beyond or above what the original text had, without kind of distorting the essence of the epic itself, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't have a better example than I think this play. I mean, obviously, Hamlet's not a sacred text. I mean, it is in some ways, I guess, but in the Church of Shakespeare. But that was a tremendous job, because I just read this, so I don't really know what absurdist means. But when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are involved in Hamlet, they are just sitting there basically nowhere. So that's part of the. I think in a sense, Stoppard is dealing with some of the things that you're talking about. They are characters being used in a story, and he's taking that on in a sense. I think that Grendel, again, there's a lot that happens when we change the point of view. It's a tremendous change. Grendel doesn't damage the epic of Beowulf. It responds to exactly the same textual elements, but it tells it all from Grendel's point of view. So that changes the entire thing, because now it's no longer about Beowulf being the central protagonist. It's about Grendel being the central protagonist. That switch of the protagonist once you realize it's relatively mind-blowing, It does. I don't have a good answer for them.
There are some.
So let me maybe start by trying to example. Okay, so one of the pieces, I'm not drawing it up right now, but you'll know probably the princess, and I feel like I've read this story, but she's basically allotted to. There's going to be a proposal from Bhishma, I think, but she's going to maybe go back to another principally. But anyway, she's depicted as vain. Okay, so in the story, she's depicted as vain. That is a perspective. Let's say the Mahabharata, I would imagine, is coming from that she's beautiful, but she's vain, perhaps, But if we're treating her as a character in a story, we can't treat her as vain. I mean, people are not just vain. They are human beings who are engaged in strategies according to their context in order to get wants. And, we have to make her more complex, essentially. This is where what I'll get to here in terms of the story, we have to understand and depict her motivations. In a sense, she can't just serve, right? I mean, it's like it's a little bit like the events in Jane Austen. They have no motivation. They don't even show up. They don't even have to show up. We don't find out that they have, a family of 5 that they're feeding at home, and that they're accepting the orders of these people who are so abusive to them because they need to feed their family and they don't have a choice. We don't get to know any of those things. So really what we're doing is we're trying to show that motivation. And Abhinav, maybe the answer to your question is, so when you're a minor character, that motivation is not shown. So does showing that motivation change the text? That's the question, maybe.
I was just going to add there are some novels by Madeline Miller where she takes the character of Circe or Patroclus, who's a companion of Achilles, and she tells the stories through characters. So, for example, in the Circe story, Odysseus is just a minor character who takes up a few chapters of the story, but a lot of the story is taking place off screen in what would be the Odyssey. That's one way of doing it. So maybe it's putting these characters in situations that are not in the Mahabharata and trying to imagine how they would be in those situations, which can be kind of freeing because then you're not feeling confined to the text, but you get to know the character and figuring out the part of the story that's not depicted and using that to enter the story.
That's a choice. That's definitely a choice. I mean, you could take a character and just have another scene in a sense, but what you're describing with Circe, there's a chapter that shows the intersection of the story we know, which is sort of grounding it into this cultural context, but then we have all these other stories. You could actually not do that. You could have Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right? As their boyhood friends. We still know the whole Hamlet, we still all know that stuff, but we're just concentrating on them and in effect humanizing them. Or you could work with this idea of intersection with the story that you're drawing upon. It's yeah, those sound like good examples. Let me, with that in mind, I guess this is probably the main thing I'm trying to address, maybe, and it might, it's a good time as creating these projects that that taking on this project means pretty much writing a story with these characters as central. And so rather than reproducing the text that you know. This is another question for us. It's like if we're reproducing the text that everyone knows, what are we bringing to it, right? What is our addition? So we as writers want to be relevant. We want to bring something, and that's what bring is some sense of our artistic intent. This is a little description of, is this sharing here? It says, what is a story? So these are just my quick notes. It is? Sure. So as I said, actor plus event equals a change or resolution. This becomes relevant again to these minor characters. We'll see that who is the protagonist in the story? Who is that central character? The answer to that is who will change, right? That's kind of a tough thing that's a little narrator, magic there. But the protagonists, we've decided in the beginning, the ones who are going to enter into events, and they're going to come out the other side transformed by those events. That is the story arc. That is an essential element to it. I don't know if I have to go a lot about why that happened is not a story, but maybe I'll just say briefly that this is my metaphor for it. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is changed by the experience of hearing it, it doesn't matter. The character, the protagonist, is the vehicle for the reader's experience. And the reader wants to experience an event peacefully and not in peril. They want to experience and be changed by it psychically. That's why the comes to our work. They want that change. They're not coming to our work to read things that are irrelevant to their lives, basically that don't matter. And so the way we work with stories is we create this protagonist in which they have an experience that does change. The reader rises with that experience and experiences it through verisimilitude, and they're also changed and transformed the story. It leads us to, I read this and I cannot look at the world the same way again. That's a very positive result of work. And in fact, what happened to me when I read, for example, Grendel, it is also what happened to me when I watched Tom Stoppard's play. I could not look at it the same way again because I could not look at characters about humanity. That's what occurred to Grendel. I could not look at the antagonistic force as a monster, right? Because that depiction. So that was revelatory. So character plus event is a conflict. Conflict is two things, right? The character and the event is the force of antagonism. It could be a person, a natural disaster. It could be this, that, or the other thing. Basically, to create the greatest dynamic force, they should be diametrically opposed. I want money. The bank, I do not to give it to you. I want money, okay? Diametrically opposed. This creates the greatest action. We need the greatest diametric opposition on the page because at the end of the day, we're dealing with words. So words don't hear me, right? So we need to have some things behind those words that are forceful and as I sometimes say, drawn with thick lines so that the reader will feel, because creating a feeling in the reader is the point of our work. Okay, as I'm here, the point of view, character the one who will change. And then this is going into some things the complexity of the point of view character is created by two things that are essential to the story and the story arc. We understand the point of view characters struggle, meaning we understand that they want money, for example, but we also understand the point of view character subjectively, meaning that we have insight into them and we can we understand why they're trying to get this thing, even if they don't understand it themselves. Take, for example, the character who is depicted as vain. So we might see that she's taking actions to look good. What we understand internally and subjectively is that she's doing those actions because she fears being rejected, because reject means that she's used to her family, useless to the world. So we might understand those two issues. So now we don't see someone is vain at all. We see who wants something and wants something for a complex emotional reason. And that makes her human. You see my arrow, I didn't quite think of things in the right order. Okay. We witness events. Okay, so I was going to say the point of view character. So the distinction between the view character protagonist is that we understand them both externally and internally. However, we do not understand the antagonistic forces subjectively. We only understand them objectively. Does that make sense? So the writer should be depicting the antagonistic forces, but not investigating them. So that is left for the reader. That space of feeling that the reader is able to assume. So, like for example, wants a question?
Yeah, I would ask. That's my story that you have been talking about, and I just wanted to mention.
Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that this story of Madhuri is about a vain, ignorant girl who has been very protected in her family, and she grows on to learn things in life. That's I wanted to show the difference between her beginning and her end. That's why I started like that.
Okay.
I actually think it's a
well,
story. I think
yeah,
it's different from the story. It's not your story, I think.
Yeah, it's my story. He mentioned the proposal from Bhishma for Madhuri.
No, I think it's another one.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry then.
It's not the issue with, so even as you say, like, this is an ignorant girl who becomes less ignorant. So what we want to do is we don't want to, so the same with like vanity or ignorance or whatever it is. We don't really want to take our protagonist. We want to show the protagonist's point of view. This is what we want to be engaged as the author, essentially judging our character and depicting that. We want to try and show the character's struggle. It's the character's struggle, their internal and external struggle, that the reader gets to experience the same struggle, their human struggle, through, as I say, similitude, so they come to an outcome. This is the effect of the story.
Yeah, I got your point.
That's the central thing that we. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
So you know, so like one of the ways, like, you know, if it is or not, it doesn't really matter. But like, so like as a writer, like I say, I would not write, you know, so-and-so was
can't.
a vain princess.
Yes, I can't be
da, da,
judging
da.
her. Yes.
Right. I would instead have her doing her things, acting, right? This is the thing that we want from the protagonist, is that they act, and they act through motivation, just like all of us do. That's the central thing to depict when we bring an inner character who is only serving a role before. Now we want to make them the central character. We want the protagonist. The protagonist acts. I want to emphasize that non-action is also a choice and an action. So they are an actor. They are doing things, and they are making choices for reasons important to them. And if I can, I am also the central character in my own story. I also do the same thing. So now this is a point of similarity between me and her, right? I think it's worth saying, like, and it's for us all, right? If I come in and I'm judging my character, right, that the reader either agrees with you or feels threatened by it, right? They're like, oh, she's vain. That's a distance. You know, I'm like, well, I'm a real person. I'm a character that engages actions and I'm struggling. I'm filled with a zest for life. But this character is just flat, just like this. I can't identify with them. But when you show her struggle, which she has, I find my struggle with her struggle. I'm also struggling. Struggle is the universal element, it seems to me. And it's also this wonderful thing. This is how I think why point of view is so powerful. Why it's such a powerful tool in our writing is that, like I say, the point of view character, the protagonist, we understand both their external struggle. We see what they're doing. Everyone else sees that too. She's there primping, you know, doing all her stuff. But we also understand the motivation. So both the external and the internal. I am the same way. You see me going around, walking around the street, strutting around, you know, being all big and bad. You don't understand the internal, that I'm actually terribly insecure and terribly afraid. And I push people away because emotional interaction makes me scared, whatever it is. So we all are doing the same thing. We all have this externalization and we internalization that no one knows about, a secret. When we show both of those things, then my secret self, who's just like that, I identify with it. And I empathize with it. Now, this is what people have often said, you know, heard me say, what do we want to do when we write a story? We want to grab the reader by the throat, violent sounding, and not let them go. What I just said now about the internal and external point of view, and me having an analyzed self and an internal secret, that connection is to grab by the throat.
Thank you. I got your point, and I'll work on it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to be delicate, but when you do, you will see that it's an amazing experience, because what you'll have to do as a writer is you have to go into her humanity. And that is an amazing thing. I was just reading one section. I think Sorella has a review, maybe, and so I'm sorry, I don't know the Mahabharata as well as I can, but there's a charioteer who's been given the divine ability to, you know the story from everywhere, and that's a little bit of the feeling, to be the writer and go into the humanity of the character. That's the imaginative capacity. And when we, but when we claim to try to do it, this is how it goes. And we're just trying to do it. We don't succeed in doing it. We try it and we do it to the best that we can. That is our obligation.
So Otis, one question now on how do you want to do this next week? Because you've talked about some of the the higher points of minor characters and establishing the point of view, the conflict, and so on. And given that you also have a substantial number of writing samples from these authors selected for the two anthologies, so how do you want to do this next week? Is there anything in particular you want to tell the authors, or what you think you want to cover next Sunday?
Well, okay, great, thank you, Abhinav. So I totally understand how this is, but I think what I would say is maybe, and like I said, I have not been able to look at everyone's work, but I think I would like if people could say, if all the authors could maybe just try and take this in. I was thinking about this a little bit. Okay, so I'm saying all these things, but it's sort of like trying to tell someone how to dance. You can't really tell how to dance. All you can say is listen to the music, right? So I'm maybe trying to say, take this in, see where it goes with you, and maybe look at these pages to start with. The thing that we want with most, the thing that we want to begin with are really these two things of point of view character and understanding their external conflict and their inner conflict. And what I would suggest to do that so that we know who the protagonist is, we know that they are things like they are the vehicle for the reader. They're the vehicle for the reader's discovery through this life process that we call story. So to establish the point of view, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. I often say establish setting, but now I want to revise myself. I'm always revising. Establish the setting through protagonist's point of view. Reveal the conflict, the external conflict, by including the antagonistic force, which is basically the rest of the world, an antagonistic force, so that we're clear of the conflict. And try and let us into the interiority of the character so we understand internal conflict. I didn't quite get to some other aspects of story, but basically that internal conflict and the internal conflict can be reduced to this idea of what they want. So if we're talking the woman who's primping herself, she wants accepted, right? So she wants to be accepted. So that's what she wants consciously. Subconsciously, there's a greater need. Should be aware of, to some degree, even if conscious need, they don't know it consciously, they're driven towards it. So it isn't, she wants to be accepted, but she needs to be, for lack of a better term, loved, something. So we want to try and show these two things right away, if we can, because they are the subject of the story. And what happens with the story is what they want. This little shape is called chiasmus by the Greeks. We have a reversal of these two things where what they want becomes diminished. They do not get what they want in a story. But if a story has a positive ending, they get, as the Rolling Stones say, a need, which is to be realized with themselves, to be actualized. It's enlightenment in a sense. Even that is a kind of rebirth, because what they want is often material, but what they need is very often spiritual. And that's the movement of story. And we see that movement reflected in all of these ancient stories. I know that they're there. All the traditional stories have them. We're taking on the job here of trying to have this story take place with the minor characters.
So,
so if we can take that on, I would love to see driving into that point of view of the character that you're treating, so that the reader, their humanity, that would be a great aspiration. I would love to see that.
So here's a suggestion. We are at we're close to closing time now, but so here's a suggestion to the people who sent in their works. If you want to take these points and rework your sample, if you think it needs reworking, if not, then that's obviously also fine. But if you want to rework your sample and then send it back to Otis, then perhaps next week, Otis, you can pick up some 2, 3, 4, however many you're comfortable with, and use some of these concepts that you have talked about today, and use them to illustrate, whether how well they have been applied or not applied, or where things could be improved, or what is, coming out very well versus not. How about that? So, it's both to you as well as to all the, all the participants.
Yeah, Abhinav, that's a great suggestion. So right. I mean, there's, no forcing. Okay, so just take things in, see if that this inspires. Look at those first pages, be like, well, maybe just try it. I do this a lot. Okay, I take the written and I just write experiment. And sometimes, or you could even say, that Otis experiment. I'm gonna do it, right? And just try. Not that you feel invested in, that places, right? But this is just a place to open it up. It would be great suggestion. If you write to me and tell me it's a rewrite, and then I'll treat this one, as the right of the older one. And I will also then work to review the older pieces if I don't have a rewrite. Does that sound good? So then,
yeah, absolutely.
Then I'll be treating everybody's work.
So it looks like we have an exciting Sunday coming up 1 week from now, because I am absolutely looking forward to these pieces and the feedback, because 2 anthologies await the result of the refinement and improvements and edits that will follow these writing sessions, and obviously the work that Aditi and Shiv Kumar will put in. So folks, thank you so much for sending in your samples. Otis, thank you for walking us through these higher points. And if you can send the your notes in whatever form, PDF or whatever, I will circulate them with with these with these writers. And folks, if you just hold on one sec, I'm also going to share a link to a WhatsApp group that we have for these open house. It's open to anyone who's interested. So we don't get too many messages on the group. So that's good, given that I'm sure everyone is part of a few hundred WhatsApp groups already. And I am pasting that link right. Okay, now that I've done that, you can copy that link. And any closing words, Otis, before we close for today?
Well, I think I have to say that is a really cute dog. Celia has this puppy. Does everyone see the puppy there? Look, eyes. Oh my.
Yes.
And you all, thank you. I really appreciate you moderating me today. As writers, these are issues that, I mean, we grapple so deeply. This is really the work that we do, you know, we frame story, our acknowledgement of choosing a protagonist versus being a protagonist isn't being a protagonist. There's choosing the protagonist from the point of the writer. And this aspect of humanity I want to come back to. It's really, this is, I've said before, you know, all of us, we live with one point of view, but when we write, we try to capture the humanity and point of view of someone else. And that is I think that is a noble calling to try to do that. In fact, it's a noble calling to even try to do that with ourselves, to find that humanity within ourselves. And so I really truly admire you all for engaging in this. I mean, I think it's, I don't know, I kind of think it's why we're here, but I don't want to get corny about it. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Otis, and thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next Sunday. Bye.
Thank you, Otis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.